The woman I loved watched my mother die over a phone call and told me I was being dramatic. She had $200,000 in an account I didn't even know about, money that was partly mine. And she wouldn't lend me $8,000 to keep my mother alive. And the worst part, while I was sleeping on a hospital bench begging God for one more week, she was buying a Cartier bracelet for a man she'd been seeing behind my back for 7 months. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how I lost everything, then built a life so good that the people who destroyed me came crawling back, only to find the door permanently closed. I met Naomi at a friend's housewarming party in the city. She was standing near the kitchen island, laughing at something, wearing a plain white blouse and jeans. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed money. Well, she told me she worked in consulting, which I later learned was her word for sitting on the advisory board of her family's property development firm. She drove a used Audi, not because she had to, but because, as she explained months later, she didn't want people treating her differently. I liked that about her. I thought it meant she was humble. In the beginning, she was magnetic, warm. She asked about my life like she actually cared. I was working as a project coordinator for a mid-size engineering firm. Decent salary, nothing special. I told her straight up on our third date, I'm not rich, I don't come from money, and I split everything fair. She smiled and said, that's exactly what I want. I believed her. The first 6 months were good, really good. We split meals, alternated who paid for what, kept things easy. But somewhere around month 7, the temperature changed. It started small. She'd make little comments when I suggested a restaurant. You sure you can afford that? Or if I bought her flowers, she'd tilt her head and say, you don't have to try so hard, you know. I'm not going anywhere. It sounds sweet on paper, but the way she said it, there was always this undercurrent. Like she was testing me. Like she was waiting for me to slip up and ask for something. I never did. Not once. I paid my rent, my bills, my groceries, everything. I never touched a cent of her money. I didn't even know the full extent of her money. That changed the night we had dinner with her parents. Her father picked us up in a chauffeured Mercedes. Their house wasn't a house. It was an estate. Staff. A wine cellar with bottles older than my grandmother. A private gallery hallway with actual original paintings. Her mother looked me up and down like I was a stain on the carpet and said, Naomi tells us you're in construction? I corrected her politely. Project coordination for an engineering firm. And she just nodded like it was the same thing. Naomi didn't correct her either. That night, driving home, I asked her why she never told me her family was that wealthy. She got defensive. Because every guy I've ever been with wanted something. I needed to know you were different. I told her I understood. I told her it didn't change anything. And I meant it. But it changed something for her. After that night, the accusations started. Not outright. She was too smart for that. It was a slow drip. She'd question why I suggested we go on a trip together. That she'd raise an eyebrow if I mentioned needing new work boots. Once, I casually said my car needed a transmission repair, and she replied, you're not hinting, are you? I stared at her for a full 5 seconds and said, Naomi, I've never asked you for a single thing. She shrugged. I'm just checking. Just checking. Those 2 words became the soundtrack of our relationship. Meanwhile, I started noticing things. She was on her phone more, laughing at texts she wouldn't show me, going out with friends and coming back at 2 in the morning smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself she wouldn't do that to me. Then my mother got sick. It started with a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. She'd been living alone in my hometown, 3 hours north, working part-time at a school canteen. I drove up to see her one weekend and she looked thinner, paler. She told me not to worry. 2 weeks later, the doctor called me directly. Advanced pneumonia compounded by a heart condition no one had caught. She needed a procedure. The public wait time was months. The private option was fast, but it cost $8,000 out of pocket. I had about $3,000 saved. I called everyone I knew. My cousin lent me $500. A mate from work gave me $200. I was still short. I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling for an hour before I picked up the phone and called Naomi. I told her everything. My voice cracked. I told her my mother could die if we didn't move fast. I told her I'd pay her back every cent, that I'd sign something if she wanted, that I just needed help this one time. There was a long pause. Then she said, Daniel, how do I know this is real? I felt my chest cave in. What do you mean? How do you know it's real? She's in the hospital. I'll send you the paperwork. I'll send you the doctor's number. Call them yourself. Another pause, then quieter. It's just, this is exactly how it starts. A sick relative, an emergency. Then it becomes a habit. I heard a voice in the background, male, say something I couldn't make out. She muffled the phone, then came back. I'm sorry, Daniel. I can't. I need to protect myself. She hung up. I drove to the hospital that night. I sat next to my mother's bed and held her hand and told her everything was going to be fine. She smiled at me with tired eyes and said, You were always a terrible liar, Danny. She died 11 days later. The procedure never happened. I was holding her hand when she went. The monitors started beeping and the nurses rushed in and someone pulled me back by the shoulders. I remember the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. I remember the smell of disinfectant and stale air. I remember a nurse saying something kind to me that I couldn't process because all I could hear was the flatline tone ringing through my skull like a church bell in an empty room. I buried her with money I borrowed from a co-worker's brother at interest. There were 9 people at the funeral. My cousin, a few of her friends from the school, the neighbor who used to check on her, no one from my life in the city, not one person. For 2 weeks after the funeral, I didn't speak. I went to work, came home, sat in the dark. I stopped eating properly. I stopped answering my phone. I didn't call Naomi. Well, she texted me once, hope you're okay. And I stared at those 3 words until the screen went black. 3 words. That's what my mother's life was worth to the woman who could have saved her. Then the package arrived. It was a bank statement, sent anonymously to my apartment in a plain envelope. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then I opened it and saw Naomi's name. It was a joint account I'd never heard of, but my name was on it too. A business incentive account linked to a contract I'd worked on the year before, where Naomi's family firm had been the client. There was a performance bonus of $42,000 that had been deposited into this account 8 months ago. I had never been told. I had never signed anything authorizing her to manage it. And the withdrawals. The withdrawals told a story that burned a hole right through me. $12,000 at a luxury resort, $6,000 at a jeweler, $4,000 at a high-end menswear boutique, $8,000 in direct transfers to a name I didn't recognize. Marcus Hale. I searched the name. It took me less than 10 minutes to find him on social media. 31, clean jaw, expensive watch in every photo. The kind of guy who posts motivational quotes over pictures of rented supercars. And there he was, arm around Naomi at a rooftop bar in a photo posted 3 months ago. The caption read, My queen knows how to treat a king. With my money, my earned money, my contractual bonus for months of actual work. I scrolled further. There were more photos, weekend trips, restaurant tables covered in champagne flutes. A designer jacket he'd tagged her in with a heart emoji, all of it funded by an account with my name on it, an account I didn't know existed, holding money I'd never been told about, drained by a man who'd been whispering in her ear that I was the problem. While I was begging her for $8,000 to save my mother's life, she had already spent more than that on a man she was sleeping with behind my back. A man who, I would later learn, had been telling her for months that I was using her, that I was a liability, that she should cut me off before I drain her. He was the voice in the background on that phone call, the one I couldn't quite make out, the one who was right there, listening, while I cried and pleaded for the life of the woman who raised me. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. Something just turned off inside me. A door closed, and behind it was every excuse I'd ever made for her, every uncomfortable moment I'd swallowed, every time I told myself she just needed reassurance. All of it collapsed into a single cold point of clarity. I drove to her apartment the next morning. She opened the door in a silk robe, coffee in hand, and smiled like nothing had happened. Danny, I was just thinking about you. Want to come? Who's Marcus Hale? The coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes went wide for just a second. Then she recovered. Who told you that name? I held up the bank statement. $42,000, Naomi. My bonus. My name on an account I didn't know existed. You spent it on trips and jewelry for a man you've been hiding from me. And when my mother was dying, when I begged you for a fraction of what was already mine, you told me you needed to protect yourself. She set the coffee down. Her face cycled through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Shock, anger, calculation, and then something I'd never seen from her before. Fear. Daniel, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I'm done, and I'm getting that money back. You can't just watch me." I walked out. She called me 11 times that day. I didn't answer a single one, but the worst part wasn't over. That Monday, I walked into work and something felt wrong. People were looking at me sideways. Conversations stopped when I passed. A woman from accounts who I'd spoken to maybe twice walked past me in the kitchen and actually shook her head, this tiny, disgusted headshake, like she'd already heard the full story and convicted me. My supervisor pulled me into his office and closed the door. He looked uncomfortable. "Hey, I got a call from someone saying you've been harassing your girlfriend's family for money. Said you threatened legal action against their firm to extort them. This came from their legal team, Daniel. I need to understand what's going on." Naomi had called my employer. She, or someone in her family, had contacted my company and framed me as a threat, a gold digger, a harasser, the exact thing she'd always accused me of being. My supervisor looked at me like I was already guilty. My coworkers whispered in the hallway. Someone from HR scheduled a formal meeting for Wednesday. A guy I'd had beers with the week before couldn't look me in the eye at the printer. But I sat in the car park after that conversation and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could feel it all stacking. The grief, the betrayal, the theft, and now this. My reputation, the only thing I had left, being shredded in front of people I respected. I had lost my mother. I'd been cheated on. My money had been stolen. And now, the woman who did all of it was trying to take my job too. That night, I called a lawyer. A real one, an old university friend who now worked in commercial litigation. I told him everything, emailed him the bank statement, and explained the account setup. He went quiet for about 30 seconds. Then he said, "Daniel, this isn't just a relationship dispute. There are potential fraud issues here. Unauthorized account management, misappropriated funds tied to a contractual bonus, a defamation through your employer. She's exposed." We filed within the week. The response from Naomi's side was immediate and aggressive. Her family's lawyers sent a cease and desist, calling my claims baseless and motivated by personal resentment. They threatened a countersuit. They painted me as an unstable, vengeful ex-boyfriend. It didn't work because I had the bank records. I had the account with my name on it, an account I never authorized. I had the withdrawal records. I had the timeline showing that my bonus was deposited months before my mother got sick and that the bulk of it was spent on Marcus Hale. I had text messages I'd saved where Naomi admitted on the phone that she handled the account. By ice. And my lawyer found something even worse. The original contract between her family's firm and mine included a clause that my bonus was to be paid directly to me, not into a joint account. Someone in her family's accounting team had rerouted it. The case never went to trial. Her family settled. I received the full $42,000 plus an additional $60,000 in damages and legal costs. They also issued a formal retraction of the statements made to my employer. My supervisor shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "I'm sorry, mate. I should have asked you first." He was right, but I didn't have the energy to be angry at him. The day the settlement hit my account, I sat on the floor of my apartment with the lights off and cried for the first time since my mother's funeral. Not because I was happy, but because I kept thinking, if I'd had this money 4 months earlier, she'd still be alive. I would have traded every cent of that settlement, every dollar of that victory, to hear her voice one more time. But that door was closed, and I had to walk through a different one. I quit my job 2 weeks later, not out of bitterness. I just couldn't be in that office anymore. Every hallway reminded me of the whispers. Every meeting room reminded me of the HR sit-down where I had to defend my own character because a woman I loved decided to weaponize her family's influence against me. I moved back to my hometown, rented a small unit near the coast, the same town where my mother had lived, where I grew up riding bikes on cracked footpaths and eating fish and chips on the breakwall. The first morning I woke up there, I could hear magpies and traffic and the distant hum of a lawnmower, sounds I hadn't heard in years. Normal sounds, quiet sounds. For the first few weeks, I did almost nothing. I walked the coast path every morning. I cleaned out my mother's house, slowly, room by room, crying in some, smiling in others. I found a photo of the two of us at my year 6 graduation. She was beaming. I was missing a front tooth. I put it on my kitchen bench and left it there. Then I started working. I used part of the settlement money to lease a small workshop space near the industrial estate and registered a business doing project consulting for local builders and developers. Nothing glamorous. I'd show up at 7, drink bad instant coffee, answer emails, chase permits, solve problems. Some weeks, I barely broke even. But every morning I woke up and the first thing I felt wasn't dread. That alone was worth more than any dollar amount. Around month 3, I met a woman named Sophie. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't glamorous. She walked into my workshop one Tuesday morning holding a clipboard and wearing steel cap boots because she was the site safety officer for a residential build I'd been contracted on. She had short brown hair, no makeup, and a way of speaking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked about the project, then about the town, then about the bakery down the road that made the best meat pies on the coast. By the end of that first conversation, I realized I'd smiled more in 20 minutes than I had in the last 6 months. Sophie was not like Naomi. She didn't test me. She didn't question my motives. Well, she didn't play games. The first time I paid for dinner, she said, "Thanks, I'll get the next one." And she did. No drama, no scoreboard. One night, about 2 months into seeing each other, I told her what I'd been through. All of it. The relationship, the money, my mother, the lawsuit. I told her because I didn't want to hide anything, and because I was terrified that if she found out later, she'd think I was damaged goods. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're not broken, Daniel. You're just healing. And that takes whatever time it takes." I almost lost it right there. Sophie didn't try to fix me. She didn't flood me with affection or grand gestures. She just showed up, consistently. She'd drop off lunch at the workshop if she was passing through. She'd text me in the morning, nothing deep, just, "Hope today's a good one." She remembered things I said weeks earlier and brought them up naturally. She met my friends, helped me paint the workshop, laughed at my terrible jokes, and never once made me feel like I had to prove I was worth her time. That's the thing no one tells you about finding a good person after a bad one. It doesn't feel electric. It doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like relief, like putting down something heavy you didn't realize you were still carrying. The business grew. I picked up a second contract, then a third. I hired a part-time admin assistant. I started getting calls from firms 2 towns over. Nothing massive, but something real. Something I'd built with my own hands and my own name. No one else's money, no one else's connections. Sophie and I made it official around the 6-month mark. She moved in the month after. We adopted a dog, an old staffy named Biscuit who slept on the couch like he owned the place. Life was quiet. Life was good. Then Naomi called. I hadn't heard from her in almost a year. Her name lit up my phone on a Sunday night while I was washing dishes. I stared at it for 3 rings, then answered. "Daniel." Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "I know I don't have the right to call, but I need you to hear me out." I said nothing, so she kept going. She told me Marcus had left her. Turned out he'd been running the same play on 2 other women, flattering them, isolating them from their partners, spending their money and disappearing. She said her family had cut her allowance after the lawsuit settlement embarrassed them publicly. And she said she'd been in therapy. She said she finally understood what she'd done to me. "I was so afraid of being used," she said, "that I pushed away the one person who never tried to use me. And I let in the one person who did." She paused. "I'm sorry about your mother, Daniel. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I will carry that for the rest of my life." There was a time when those words would have meant something. A time when hearing her admit what she did would have felt like oxygen. But standing in my kitchen, dish towel over my shoulder, Sophie reading on the couch behind me, and Biscuit snoring at her feet, I realized I didn't need it. Not the apology, not the closure, not even the acknowledgement. I'd already closed that chapter myself. "Naomi," I said, "I hear you, and I believe you mean it. But there's nothing left for us. No friendship, no second chance. I hope you find your way, but you won't find it with me." She cried, quietly. Then she whispered, "I know." I hung up. Sophie looked up from her book. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just someone from a long time ago." She nodded, didn't push, just smiled and went back to reading. I finished the dishes, turned off the kitchen light, and sat down next to her. Biscuit shifted and rested his head on my foot. Outside, I could hear the ocean 2 blocks away, the same sound I'd heard as a kid, the same sound my mother heard every morning when she opened the windows. And for the first time in years, maybe the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because everything had worked out perfectly, but because I'd stopped chasing people who made me prove I was enough, and I'd started building a life where I already knew I was. No one tells you that the best kind of revenge isn't a courtroom win or a public humiliation or watching someone crawl back to you broken. The best revenge is waking up on a Sunday morning in a home you built, next to a person who chose you without conditions, and realizing you don't think about the past anymore. Not because you forgot, because you just don't need it.